we shall commence this module by discussing about trade. Trade between the countries can either be the free trade or the protected trade. Free trade refers to a trade of goods and services between countries which is not impeded by government restrictions or interventions. Many economists have a belief that free trade leads to gains which are beyond the elimination of consumption and the production distortions. Protectionism refers to an economic policy which restricts trade between the economies. Restrictions in trade could be by way of tariffs, non-tariff barriers such as quotas, export subsidies, voluntary export restraints, technical barriers, etc. After studying this module, you will be able to understand the concept of free trade, advantages and disadvantages of free trade, concept of protected trade and its significance, analyze the benefits and cost of protected trade. Let us now discuss about free trade. A trade policy of placing no restrictions on the movement of goods between countries is known as the policy of free trade. So, the trade is free from all the tariff and non-tariff barriers. Such a policy permits the flow of international commerce in its natural environment and is free from all artificial impediments. Free trade enables nations to focus on their core competitive advantages, thereby maximizing economic output and fostering income growth for their citizens. The idea that free trade is welfare enhancing is one of the most fundamental doctrines in modern economics, dating back to Adam Smith 1776 and David Ricardo 1816. According to Adam Smith, the term free trade is used to denote that system of commercial policy which draws no distinction between domestic and foreign commodities. Speaking in an alternative way, free trade denotes freedom in totality of international exchange. With such policy, no barriers to goods trade exist between countries. Advantages of free trade. The important arguments in favor of free trade are as follows. First, the theory of comparative advantage. According to Ricardo, by specializing and trading goods in which countries have a lower opportunity cost or greater comparative advantage, there can be an increase in economic welfare for all the countries. Free trade requires countries to do specialization in those goods having comparative advantage. Such production specialization brings advantage for all and result in the maximization of national production. Second, better utilization of factors of production. Free trade leads to the most economic utilization of the productive resources. Under free trade, each country specializes in the production of those goods for which it is best suitable and import those goods from the other countries in which the nation has comparative disadvantage. Third, reduction in tariff barriers leads to the creation of trade. Creation of trade happens when consumption shifts from high cost production houses to low cost production houses. Reducing the tariff barriers with an objective to bring about free trade in an economy may help the countries for trade creation. Fourth, lower prices of imported goods. Free trade fetches imports at cheap rate. It is a lucrative argument from the consumer's perception. With free trade arena, consumers benefit via lower prices, producers benefit as factors of production are employed in more fruitful and specialized production which gives better earnings. Fifth, increased competition. With the expansion of trade, domestic firms encounter competition from abroad. As a result of this, there would be more motivation to cut cost and increase efficiency. It may prevent domestic monopolies from charging too high prices. So, the inefficient producers forcefully improve their efficiency or quit. Sixth, economic growth. The countries indulged in free trade have increasing living standards, rising real incomes, and increased rates of economic growth. It is achieved by more competitive industries, efficiency, increased productivity, and the production levels. Disadvantages of free trade. Though free trade is beneficial, there are number of disadvantages given by economists who oppose free trade and trade liberalization. Free trade policy has been abandoned by all countries for the following reasons. First, under the system of free trade, the underdeveloped countries suffer very much in competition with the advanced countries. Free trade policy in India, adopted by the British government, has proved that one-time flourishing industries like handicrafts in India were completely wiped out due to the foreign competition. Second, countries cannot allow free import of injurious and harmful products, hence trade restrictions become very much necessary. Third, developing or new industries may find it difficult to become established in a competitive environment with no short-term protection policies by government. Fourth, free trade can lead to pollution and environmental problems as companies fail to include these costs in the price of goods in trying to compete with countries operating under weaker environmental legislation in some countries. Moving on to discuss about protected trade. Protection refers to the policy of encouraging domestic industries by providing subsidies to home producers or more usually by imposing custom duties on foreign products. We can protect the trade with the help of tariffs and non-tariffs. The several instruments of non-tariffs are import quota, voluntary export restraints, technical barriers to trade, etc. Protectionist policies. A variety of policies have been used to protect the trade, which are as follows. First, tariffs. Tariff is simply a tax duty levied on a product when it crosses national boundaries. For example, oil exports have been taxed by the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries in order to raise the revenue or promote scarcity in global markets and hence increase the world price of oil. Second, import quotas. An import quota is a physical restriction on the quantity of some goods that may be imported during a specific time period. The restriction is usually enforced by issuing import license to some group of individuals or the firm. Import quotas aim at regulating and restricting imports in order to protect domestic industries from foreign competition and to correct disequilibrium in the balance of payments. Third, direct subsidies. Government subsidies in the form of cheap loans are sometimes given to the local firms that cannot compete well against imports. These subsidies are provided to protect the local jobs and to help the local firms adjust to the world markets. Technical barriers to trade. Technical barriers refers to a country's national standard for health, safety and product labeling. Even when these regulations are designed solely for the protection of domestic population, they can distort international trade. For example, most firms produce products primarily for domestic consumption and the exportation of the product provides a secondary source of demand. However, when a firm decides to export its product, it will have to change the product label. In most cases, the new label will have to conform to the importing country's product labeling and standards and to be printed in the country's official language. The next is voluntary export restraints. The other important non-tariff trade barriers or NTBs is voluntary export restraints known as VERs. These refers to the case where an importing country induces another nation to reduce its exports of a commodity voluntarily under the threat of all-round restrictions when these exports threaten an entire domestic industry. Arguments for protected trade. Let us now understand the fallacious arguments. Protecting the domestic labor against cheap foreign labor. Trade restrictions are needed to protect domestic labor against cheap foreign labor. This argument is misleading, as even if domestic wages are higher than the wages abroad, domestic labor cost can still be lower if the productivity of labor is high domestically than abroad. Moreover, the mutually beneficial trade could still based on comparative advantage, that is, the cheap labor nation specializing in the production of and exporting labor intensive commodities and the expensive labor nation specializing in the production of and exporting capital intensive commodities. Reduces domestic unemployment and cure deficit in balance of payment. Protection would reduce the domestic unemployment and a balance of payment deficit by the substitution of imports with domestic production. But these arguments are at the expense of the other nations, as it causes greater unemployment and worsen the balance of payment abroad. So, the other nations retaliate and at the end all of them lose. So, the domestic unemployment and deficit in the balance of payment should be corrected with appropriate monetary, fiscal and the trade policies rather than with the trade restrictions. Next is economic arguments. Infant industry argument. One of the most notable arguments for protection is known as the infant industry argument. An infant industry could be defined as the entity which has come new in the market, not grown up enough to stand competition from well-developed foreign industries. The argument affirms that protection is necessary for small and newly established firms, particularly in less developed economies. Newly established firms have small chance of competing on a one-to-one basis with well-established firms in developed economies. Developed country firms have been doing business since longer time and with time have become efficient in its productive method with better knowledge and information about the process of production, about market characteristics, about their own labor market, etc. As a result, they are able to offer their product at a lower price in international markets and still remain profitable. A firm producing a similar product in less developed country, on the other hand, would not have the same production technology available to it. Its management and workers would have absence of knowledge and experience of its rivals of developed country and hence will be going to have product production in a less efficient manner. If say they are forcefully made to have competition with the firms directly in the developed economies, the LDC firms will not be able to have profitable production and thus will not be able to stay in the business for a longer time. Protection of these LDC firms via taking the route of import tariff will hike the product price domestically and lessen imports from other countries. If prices are increased that are sufficient, the domestic firms will be apt to cover up their high cost of production and remain in business. Over time, these LDC firms will be able to accrue the fruits from production and experience of management that would lower its cost of production. Essentially, the firms would follow the same path that the developed country firms had followed to realize their own production efficiency improvements. Protection then allows an infant industry time to grow up. Furthermore, since the LDC firms would improve their productive efficiency over time, the protective tariffs could be gradually reduced until eventually, when the tariffs are eliminated, they would compete on an equal footing with the developed country firms. Now, strategic arguments. It means the use of a tariff to protect military capability. The point is to consume the goods produced by our country for the production of national industry, and so if the war happens, we don't need to indulge in buying products from a foreign country, and our industries would have the necessary capacity for producing all the necessary goods. We want tariffs to reduce the dependence on international resources. The next are the conservation of exhaustible natural resources argument. Production for export market may involve early of irreplaceable natural resources like gas, oil and coal. Export duty is an undesirable measure to balance the needs of present and the future generation. Now, discussing the disadvantages of protectionism. Protectionism may raise the prices to consumers and producers of the imported products. Protected trade would lead to less choice for consumers due to high prices. Protectionism distorts comparative advantage, leading to the inefficient use of world's resources. Specialization is reduced, and this would reduce the potential level of world's output. Competition would diminish if foreign firms are kept out of country, and so domestic firms may become inefficient without the incentive to minimize the cost. So, the motive to innovation will also be reduced. Protectionism may hinder the economic growth. Let us now summarize what we have learnt in this module. The issue of free trade and the protected trade has been in dispute since 18th century. Although free trade is commonly used in international trade, but trade protections are still supported in particular countries. Due to several negotiations on GATT and following WTO, tariff barriers have become less effective. WTO attempted to reduce the production and consumption distortions created by tariffs. However, the non-tariff barriers such as quotas, voluntary export restraints, etc. are becoming more popular, especially in the industrial countries. The World Trade Organization has been making every effort to promote international trade and solve the trade disputes.